Happy Halloween for your pal VC, and today I'll be doing a ventriloquism act from the original living dummy of Goosebumps himself. No, not Slappy, his twin brother, Mr. Wood. See, seeing how Slappy's so much more iconic and gets more of the limelight, I thought it only fair to shed some light on his much less iconic twin brother.
What this asshole really means is that he didn't have enough dough to book my much more iconic brother Slappy and could only afford to get his much less known twin brother.
Hey, I had a car battery to pay for. And that's not true, Mr. Wood. I actually think you're better than Slappy in some regards. I mean, you almost strangled a puppy to death and threatened to strangle 2 preteen girls if they didn't be your slaves. I mean, Slappy's almost never threatened to kill anybody. You threatened to kill, like, almost as much as Chucky, come to think of it.
He would resort to murdering himself if he had to sit through one of your earlier YouTube videos with your annoying as hell squeaky girly voice. Hell, you'd make his ears bleed, and dummies don't even have blood. That's how irritating your squeak was.
Oh yeah? Well, at least Slappy's only a ripoff of Chucky. You're a ripoff of Chucky and Pazuzu.
Oh, you're one to talk about ripping off?
Okay, you know what? Take a hike, Mr. Wood. Try to be nice to you. If that's the things I get, no dice. But again, in all honesty, I freaking love Goosebumps. While Goosebumps was far from the first work that proved it's possible to be effectively scary but still mostly kid-friendly, and was certainly not the last, I think Goosebumps did the best of any work. Not just because it was essentially the Twilight Zone meets Stephen King for kids, but because even on its own, it was just so damn memorable. The villains were hammy and funny, but still effectively scary yet kid-friendly. Plus, the cheesy effects used for them in the first TV series did bring them a lot of corny fun at times. Yeah, honestly, the dickish parents who never believed the kids about the horrific dangers were more unlikable, with a few exceptions from time to time. And the preteen protagonists were also pretty likable, ranging from charmingly cocky jerks, adorable but cowardly dweebs, or just regular everymans, but who have so much bullshit they have to endure in their life that your heart still goes out to them. One way or another, they always, well, almost always, have great character development from the terrors they endure. So yeah, I really love Goosebumps, and even as an adult, it still holds up pretty well. So when I heard another series was coming, I was psyched as hell. And even more psyched when I saw that some of the episodes' titles were the titles of classic Goosebumps books. Could we finally be getting a less abridged, more faithful adaptation of the books? And even better, could we finally be getting an actual adaptation of the first Night of the Living Dummy? Well, either way, I was still stoked. But I did not get what I was expecting, let's just say. See, on the contrary, these were completely new stories with completely new characters that interacted with some of the cursed objects and villains of Goosebumps, most notably Slappy. But while I was devastated I wouldn't be seeing Chris and Lindy Powell on screen for the first time, or even Mr. Wood, I will say that I was pretty pleased with what I did get for the most part. Even if it's completely new, I still feel it's true to the spirit of the original Goosebumps. It's got some good laughs, the protagonists are the usual lovable jerks, cowards, and dorks, the parents were the usual useless jerks with a few exceptions, but one big difference is, as I'm sure you guessed by the TV-14 rating, is that this version is noticeably more adults than your usual Goosebumps norm. So I decided to do a video essay about this series, covering what I liked, what I didn't, and my thoughts on it overall. So subscribers beware, you're in for a scare. So I think that the best way to start things off is by going over each protagonist and each cursed object / villain they encounter. So the series revolves around 5 teenagers who, after a Halloween party in the house of a teen who died over 30 years ago named Harold Biddle, whom they thought the house was still abandoned but turned out to have been recently acquired by their new English teacher Nathan Bratt, they each take with them one item of Biddle's that just so happens to be an iconic Goosebumps object. First we got Isaiah, the one who comes in contact with the haunted camera, which for non-Goosebumps fans is a camera whose photographs predict misfortunes that happen in the future and the camera makes come true. Kind of like the future predicting camera from the Twilight Zone with more of a horror theme. And here we got a great example of how some of these characters are more suited to suit these kinds of supernatural situations than their original counterparts. The kid in the original series who found the camera, Greg Banks, was really just an everyman, nothing too special, but Isaiah's a lovable football jock who's willing to resort to cheating in order to ace a test needed to get off academic probation, but it's clear that he's only doing so because his parents are dying to see him become the star quarterback of the University of Washington, particularly his dad, and he knows that they'll be devastated if that gets taken from them. Hell, he honestly doesn't seem as passionate about football as them, so it's kind of sweet, if still wrong, that he'd resort to cheating to make them happy. But what does that have to do with a future predicting camera? Well, like Greg, he quickly notices the grim predictions that the thing starts making, and even gets to save the life of his then girlfriend Margot when she almost eats a nut bar. She has a nut allergy. Also, an interesting addition here is that in this version, only the person who takes the photographs can see the grim outcomes. To anyone else, they're just blank photographs. But anyway, Isaiah gets a photo taken of himself, of an injury he receives on the football field, but rather than not play like a sane person would, he still decides to take the bullet for the sake of pleasing his parents. Pretty sweet, but the downside is it ironically backfires on him because his arm injury is so severe, it's going to take several months before he can play again, and thus will almost certainly miss the opportunity to impress the Dean of the University of Washington to get the scholarship he needs. Although, couldn't he have just done community college for a year, waited for his arm to heal, then show his football skills next year, and go to UW with a football scholarship? Well, I guess he never thinks of that, and act like his parents are gonna have to pay his tuition out of pocket, which Isaiah feels awful about. Next I want to talk about Isabella, the daughter of the Haunted Mask. And like Isaiah, I think her character is better written as someone who finds a mask that turns them into a trollish-like monster. That's a good example too, but she's not a heartless gangster. Before becoming a literal troll, she starts out as an internet troll who spends the majority of her time inside trolling the hell out of people she dislikes. But her excuse for that is that her mom and dad are very much your typical Goosebumps parents. They have high-profile jobs that allow them very little time for their kids, and what little they do is given to her younger brother, and they don't seem to give a rat's ass about her. Yeah, the other parents in this reboot aren't great, but Isabella's are definitely among the worst in all of Goosebumps in general, for even more reasons than you think. And of course, life goes even more south when she takes her parents' drone to school without asking, and the daredevil jock Lucas that we'll talk about later wrecks it.
And in my brain, I was sort of thinking about, like, robots taking over the world, and, you know, if there's a silver lining to any of this, it's that, you know, humanity isn't doomed.
Thank you so much for fighting the robots for us.
Now, Lucas does have a pretty sad backstory too, but it's not one that even remotely justifies wrecking Isabella's $3,000 drone. And get this, his only karma for it is detention and a weekly payment plan of $5 a week for wrecking it. But of course, Izzy's mom points out that she's not blameless either, since she did take the drone to school without asking and left it unattended, so she gets grounded indefinitely with no phone, internet, or computer.
How am I supposed to do my homework? Longhand.
You know, I'm gonna use that line sometime if I'm a parent. Also, I love how her mom doesn't even bother threatening her with no TV, because of course no one gives a rat's ass about the tube anymore. Anyway, I won't deny that Carly Beth's reason for wanting the mask was fitting too, namely that she was a wimp who jumps at her shadow, which is exploited by her peers relentlessly, even her best friend, so naturally, she saw it as a chance to turn the tables before taking it a bit too far. But what I really felt for Carly Beth, I felt Isabella was a bit more of an interesting character. Here, she was led to do less than friendly gestures before she found the mask due to all the crap she receives, namely by trolling others, and the mask ultimately turns her into a literal troll. Although an interesting touch here is, the mask doesn't look monstrous until she actually puts it on, but it's honestly still just as terrifying. And it's kind of a rinse and repeat with Carly Beth. She uses the mask for payback and to terrify others before coming to her senses. But I still really wish they'd kept that terrifying bit where she couldn't get the mask off. Oh, and one really freaky thing here is, the mask in this version has the power to influence its victims without them even putting it on yet. And you thought Carly Beth was cruel under the mask's power? Just listen to Isabella.
If this moron somehow manages to graduate, he will never make that money back flipping burgers for the rest of his life.
Whoa now.
I'm just telling Lucas to his face what everyone says behind his back, which is that you are a pathetic person. This whole jackass facade is honestly sad. Well, how's this? You're a high school guidance counselor. You literally failed at life.
Ouch.
And it's because you're an idiot, and you're worse than an idiot. You're weak.
That's it. She's going down.
Sheesh, and I thought Slappy's insults were cruel. But Isabella and her brother do give the demonic face a very lovely eulogy when they drown it in the river.
Rotten hell?
Rot in hell.
Rot in hell!
Rot in hell!
Rot in hell!
Now let's talk about Lucas, the daughter of the evil worms. I won't lie, I wasn't too psyched when I learned they were gonna adapt Go Eat Worms, because that's not one of the series' most popular books, but they actually take it in a pretty different direction, but unfortunately, not much more creative. Again, more on that in a bit. So yeah, Lucas is a reckless daredevil who seems common sense incompatible. See, his father was a respected stuntman whom he really idolized, but had died about a year ago from a super dangerous stunt off a cliff. Again, that's certainly not an excuse for reckoning Isabella's drone and not even caring, but it does explain a lot. And things get even more complicated when the father of Margot, who we'll talk about later, and the school guidance counselor visits Lucas's mom Nora to try and discuss a potentially better compensation of Lucas than just $5 a week, and it quickly escalates into a relationship which enrages both Lucas and Margot. Although, was that really an affair? Oh yeah, Margot is Isaiah's girlfriend who helped him cheat before she started dating Lucas, and she doesn't actually have any encounter with an iconic Goosebumps object like the others. But she does have a fairly sad backstory where she's crushed that her parents are divorced and don't seem to have any interest in reconciling. Cliched, yes, but it's still executed fairly well here, making her pretty likable. Anyway, even though Margot's parents are divorced and Lucas's pop is dead, the two view their relationship as the equivalent of them having an affair, and strains their relationship with their parents. Anyway, back to the worms. So the original Go Eat Worms story was pretty straightforward. A kid has an unhealthy worm obsession, mistreats them, and the worms fight back. Just your usual the worm turn story. Quite literally here. Here they pretty much resort to ripping off the alien symbiote from Spider-Man 3, where the worms bond with Lucas and make him much stronger and almost invincible, but also really boost his hubris and dickishness.
I'm gonna have to recommend that the principal expel you.
And I'm gonna recommend you stop banging my mom.
Guys, if you're gonna rip off Emo Peter from Spider-Man 3, at least include the best parts. However, it does have a decent twist, so Lucas decides to try and pull off the same stunt that his dad tried that led to his death, but Nora reveals one bit of crucial information to him that she'd forgotten to mention.
Your dad didn't do this run because he thought he could make it. He did it because he knew he couldn't. He left a note.
No.
I didn't want to tell you because I know how much you idolized him. He wanted to die, Lucas. And this was his way of doing it.
And this ultimately is what brings him to his senses before the plot resorts to ripping off Stranger Things Season 3. So yeah, not a great story, but the twist with his dad was a pretty interesting and tragic one. And then there's openly gay James, who I'm just gonna say is probably the least interesting of the kids. He's got some funny lines, sure, but his tragic backstory is that he just wants to win over some masculine gay jock, but has trouble with it due to his more, campy gay tastes. And I'm sorry, but that's it? Sheesh, there were just so many tragic backstories they could have come up with for James with him being gay. And that's the best they came up with? Kinda petty if you ask me. Doesn't help that he's also rich as hell, and his mom actually seems to be a relatively caring parent, even if she does have a slight arrogance and drinking problem. Yeah, sorry, but he's noticeably less tragic and interesting than the rest of the gang. And honestly, that makes it kind of ironic that he was the one who encountered the cuckoo clock of doom, since the kid who originally did so, Michael Webster, was one of the unluckiest kids in the Goosebumps series ever, mostly because his little sister Tara was essentially the Antichrist. So basically the deal with the clock was that it caused Michael to go back further and further in time, and was in danger of ceasing to exist if he didn't fix it. And I honestly just hated the direction they took with one of my favorite installments of the series. Instead of regressing in age and being in danger of disappearing like Michael, he only goes back to random events of the night of the Halloween party, which he ultimately uses to his advantage to get info on his crush's favorite things to exploit in the next repeat. And it works. Oh great, now they're ripping off Groundhog Day. Oh but wait, just listen to this.
Every time you went through the time loop, you created a duplicate version of yourself. That's not how time travel works. It's not how a cuckoo clock works either.
That's true, but it's still dumb. So the clones throw James in a pit and pretty much pulverize his social life because they're just dicks, I guess. Plus, I think the writers got the whole evil doppelganger premise confused with another Goosebumps installment, not Cuckoo Clock of Doom, though time will tell if that'll play out better. But in the episode's defense, the third act is pretty decent. The gang eventually figures out what's going on and follows James to his family's mine, right into a trap. And then we get the which one is the real loved one scenario. Yeah, again, I think you guys are getting your books mixed up a bit, but it does have a pretty interesting payoff.
James! What's up, man? Actually, no, none of us are the real James.
Believe it or not, I did not see that coming. And then, when Isaiah's thrown into the same pit as James, the episode does try to give us some real legit tragedy for James.
You're my best friend. You of all people should know if it's me or not.
Yeah.
Is this why it took so long to look for me?
Dude, they were impersonating you.
You wanna know what I've been dealing with? I'm drinking dirt water and starving to death while my best friend has no idea who I really am!
James!
The dupes are good at impersonating you, okay?
What does that mean?
So you know what? Forgive me for not being able to tell who the fake James is and who the real one is.
That's so easy for you to say.
Why is that?
You are the star quarterback. You've been popular since the 1st grade. It is hard being one of 6 gay people in an entire town.
It's short, but still pretty well done. And cliched or not, it is pretty sweet how Isaiah and James reconcile by destroying all the doppelgangers. Okay, so that's pretty much all the exposition for the 4 main characters. But while all this is going on, their new English teacher, Mr. Brad, is acting somewhat strange. Almost like he's not himself. Because he's not actually himself. Yeah, the spirit of Harold Biddle has possessed him. And get this, while the plots of the kids are going on, they and the audience slowly begin to piece together that their parents had a Nightmare on Elm Street-like past, where they ended up killing Biddle and agreed to never speak of it. But was it really murder? And if so, what was the reason? Well, for reasons never made clear, Lucas's mom Nora is the only one who seems legit concerned about it. Even though the evidence is practically staring them in the face, the other parents are pretty much like, nah, it'll be fine, we don't need our kids worrying about that shit. But this escalates when the other parents threaten to have Lucas removed from Nora's custody if she doesn't cut out with this Biddle nonsense, and do eventually resort to having her institutionalized at the hospital Isabella's mom works at, where she drugs Nora to make her seem insane so it'll look like she belongs there and she won't try to escape. You know, I think this may have been a great allegory for something in Goosebumps. Once in a while, the parents are both nice and useful, but the vast majority are jerks, morons, or involved in the conspiracy from the beginning. And I think this setup with Nora and the other parents is kind of a representation of that. Yes, the other parents do later apologize for being heartless frickin' idiots, but still. Anyway, the kids are ultimately able to piece together the truth about their parents, and Biddle decides to give them the rundown on the situation. And now it's time for what you've all been waiting for. Slappy. And his backstory here is pretty freaking different. So again, let me give you some context. In the original Goosebumps series, Slappy was built by an evil sorcerer from the wood of a stolen coffin, but in this series, Slappy actually is the evil sorcerer in question, or more accurately, his spirit. At first I was thinking, oh great, like Slappy's not enough of a ripoff of Chucky already, but I will admit, they do go in a pretty different direction with having Slappy originally be human. Okay, so the first half of the story isn't revealed to the kids right away, but I'm just going to give you the rundown of Slappy in this version from beginning to end. No sense in being around the corpse. So in this version, Slappy began as a normal soldier who we don't know the name of, who was so shell-shocked from the trauma of war that he wanted to find a way to bring world peace. But how? Well, he stumbled into an ancient tomb, discovered all the magic inside, and dubbed himself a sorcerer named Candu after the spell that magically healed his gunshot wounds. He eventually discovered a spell that would unleash horrific monsters and ghouls into the world, the hope being that the world would be so traumatized by this that they'd never want to see more conflict ever again for the rest of their lives and declare world peace. Only downside is, the spell in question calls for a ritual where hundreds of people are sacrificed, so he tried to manipulate a struggling carnival owner and puppet maker into letting him use his carnival for the ritual in exchange for success in life. But the carny got a change of heart and transferred his soul into Slappy the dummy. Then in the 1930s, he tried a similar approach to a god-awful and financially broke magician, turning him into an even more popular ventriloquist than Edgar Bergen, but also an even bigger jerk-ass than Charlie McCarthy, to the point where he chooses Slappy over his own family, and turns his longtime friend and manager into a dummy when he's considering dumping the act when ventriloquism loses popularity in the early 60s. But like the carny, he couldn't go through with the mass murder and neutralize Slappy, burying him deep in the walls of his new home. But 30 years later, our young friend Harold Biddle came along, who also very much fits the mold of the traditional Goosebumps protagonist. He's awkward, he has no friends, and is implied to have endured some pretty harsh bullying at his old school. Still, some of the kids at the new school, aka the protagonist's parents, can't help but like the guy and reach out to him, most notably Margot's mom Sarah. And even more so when he finds Slappy, which contrary to what his parents fear, actually boosts his popularity big time in school. Plus, it's a nice shout out to the first Living Dummy book with Chris and Lindy Powell. Anyway, like Slappy's previous hosts, Harold's cruelty and narcissism increase from the dummy as much as his popularity does, and when his parents try unsuccessfully to burn Slappy due to their son's unhealthy obsession with him, he turns them into dummies. And then, well, if you're not a Goosebumps fan, then I think you should know this is not how Slappy is usually depicted as. Like Chucky, Slappy causes trouble that the lead character is blamed for, only instead of murders, here it's just vandalism and destruction. Though I honestly think that the more manipulative approach would have had more successful results than getting him slaves like he always wanted. Anyway, we get something I was a bit disappointed by. So the most common thing Slappy gets kids in trouble for is, when they're doing a show with him, he starts cracking some insulting jokes to the audience, and of course everyone thinks that's the ventriloquist roasting them and gets pissed as hell. But given Goosebumps was aimed at kids, there was only a certain limit to how offensive he could be. And I was kind of wondering if maybe he would go a bit more vulgar since this version was rated TV-14. And while they did, it was not quite at the level I was expecting.
Do you know the world's fastest land animal? The answer is Eliza Etten, when she fled the scene after nailing the principal's Oldsmobile in the parking lot last year. Who's a sloppier kisser, Sarah? Your golden retriever or Ben? It's Ben. What's more pathetic? Victoria thinking people are still buying the virgin act? Or Nora trying to hide the fact that she is still a virgin?
Although, an interesting thing is, Harold actually seems to enjoy the insults that Slappy makes, even if he's not the one actually doing so, and when he gets in trouble with the theater teacher and his friends call him out, he pretty much tells them to F off. But Nora reveals that she saw Slappy talking, and while the others don't fully believe her, they all agree that the dummy has something to do with Harold's new narcissism and decide to finish what his parents started unsuccessfully and get rid of that thing. They succeed in capturing Slappy and putting him to sleep, but in the process, it takes the life of poor Harold. The five agree to put it all behind them. First off, let me just say that this episode was phenomenal overall, being dramatic, emotional, scary, and had some great comedy.
Due to the gross overstep of the school board censorship, we'll be replacing the F word with flipping.
Protest noted.
Flip you, that's my name. Flip you, mother flipping flippers. I drive an $80,000 BMW. That's my name, mother flipping britches. Okay.
But I found the way to explore the pasts of the parents kind of a letdown. A big issue is that the parent whose relationship with Biddle they focused on the most was Margot's mom. Yeah, they honestly gave the two a very sweet connection that felt like it was starting to bloom into something else, which made it all the more sad when Harold turned his back on her and she ended up accidentally causing his death. But my question is, why have Margot's mom be the one to have this relationship with him, given she lives out of state and is barely in the series? Wouldn't it have just been so much more interesting to have one of the regular recurring parents be the one to be Harold's closest friend? Then we could see more of the stress it's bringing on them that this kid may be back, who's evil, but they still can't help but find a bit tragic. Like, why not Isabella's mom? That would explain why she's so bitter and distant today, given that it was her good friend who turned on her and she ended up accidentally killing. Or why not Nora? That might have explained why she seemed more convinced that Biddle was back than the other parents. The strong connection they had as kids might have given her a bit more awareness of his presence than the others. But no, they give this to the parent with the least amount of screen time. And unfortunately, the flashback doesn't really give any explanation for what led to some of the other parents' flaws. Like, what exactly did make Isabella's mom so bitter in life? Or what made Isaiah's dad or James' mom so egotistical? But I'd say the biggest flaw is, they don't give the other parents any good reason to not believe Nora. They all saw Slappy come to life and Biddle's spirit magically leave the house. And the biggest explanation why they don't heed to Nora's warning to protect their kids just seems to be that they just want to protect their kids from the trauma they went through, to the point where they threatened to have Lucas taken from her custody and frickin' dump her in an asylum. I guess they can't have their kids be emotionally wrecked wusses. I mean, pansies apparently don't get into UW or become doctors. Okay, so back to the main story. So as you may have guessed, the teens are fully aware from Biddle's story that their parents were only trying to help him and were not the cold-blooded murderers he viewed them as. But still being too prideful to admit himself wrong, he imprisons the Tykes in a scrapbook where they find the soul of the real Mr. Brad as well, with expected results. Okay, so the scenes where they try to escape the scrapbook are a tad boring, and this was clearly a filler episode, but it is really sweet how they encounter Biddle's parents, and they reveal that not only do they not have any grudge against their son, but they also won't move on to heaven without him. That is pretty cool. The scene where they try to punch Mr. Brat back into his own body also had me laughing a bit. But in all honesty, my favorite scene of the episode is when Nora gets discharged from the mental ward and gives Isabella's mom, whose name is Victoria, a very nice putting down.
You drugged me, Victoria.
You were agitated and upset, and we didn't want you doing anything you regretted. It was for your own good.
Well, maybe I should have a quick conversation with my lawyer, or the state medical board, you know? for my own good.
Karma's a bitch, ain't it, Vic? And I also love this line from James's mom, Eliza.
I think it's safe to say that Nora was right all along.
Meh, better late than never, I suppose. Okay, so the kids get out the scrapbook and figure out that Biddle's pursuing Nora, who currently has Slappy in her possession, and they try to come to her rescue. While this is going on, the love triangle between Lucas, Margot, and Isaiah is getting a bit more intimate, let's just say. Speaking of love triangles, for some odd reason, they try to do something similar with Sarah, Colin, and Nora, where Colin's angry that Nora can't tell him where she's going when she's off to keep Biddle from Slappy. Yeah, that's apparently something he needs to talk to Isaiah's dad about for marriage advice. Dude, some things are just personal. It's not betrayal of trust if you don't reveal every single frickin' thing, but he's all like, dude, I just officially broke up with my ex-wife for you. Can't you be a little more open? But the scene in the mountains does have a very strong Shining-like atmosphere, especially with Biddle as Brat giving a very Jack Torrance-esque vibe when pursuing Nora. And believe it or not, the other parents decide to fit the category of rare useful Goosebumps parents for a change and join their kids on their quest to stop Biddle and Slappy once and for all. So when they catch up to him, the other parents apologize for accidentally killing him, but he initially rejects their apology, until Margot reveals that she saw his parents and reveal that they've forgiven him and still think of him as their hair bear. And that's enough to bring Biddle to his senses and realize that he's been the dummy for trusting Slappy this whole time, and finishes off the cursed sack of kindling Disney villain style before going to heaven with his parents. A bit cliched and predictable, but it is still pretty well executed, making it pretty heartwarming overall. So supposedly, all's well that ends well. The other parents apologize to Nora for not believing her, but Nora doesn't say I told you so, because to quote the creator of George and Martha, James Marshall, that's not what friends are for. The kids meanwhile decide to take a road trip to Seattle to visit Margot's mom Sarah, and Brad decides to write a whole book about their adventures, only slightly modifying everyone's names for obvious reasons. And the publishers love the book and even think it can be the next Stephen King for children. Yeah, guess what they're referencing there. But as I'm sure you've guessed by there being 2 whole episodes left, all's not quite over yet. Turns out the publishers want a more exciting twist ending, and not the over-cliched one of everyone turning out to be ghosts the whole time. But Brad has writer's block, and rather than just use ChatGPT like a sane person would in this scenario, he of course decides to bring back Slappy to life for help, who naturally promises him the best ending imaginable if he'll do a few small things for him, namely get his human corpse back and perform a spell to reanimate it so that he can have his old human body back. Yeah, too bad Charles Lee Ray didn't know that kind of spell. Meanwhile in Seattle, the gang's enjoying being 12th graders there, but the love triangle's taking a pretty grim turn, where Margot's considering moving back to Seattle with her mom, and Lucas is torn about moving there too with her one day to be with his girl, or staying in his hometown where the memories of his childhood and more importantly his father reside. Ultimately, the stress of this causes Lucas to chicken out and head back home. Honestly, the scenes of this are really well executed, but what it leads up to, well, we'll get into that in a bit. But when Lucas does get home, he finds a great surprise awaiting him. His dad is actually alive! Apparently he had been a government witness for a trial this entire time, and Uncle Sam forced him to fake his suicide for such.
It was either that or go to prison, son. But the trial's over, and I'm back. And I'm never gonna leave you again.
And the two decide to reconnect with a little joyride on there. No, of course it's really Can-Do in a trap. I honestly love this look he gives, like, gee, you're both even more of dummies than I used to be. And dummy Lucas gives a look like, yeah, I really should have seen this coming a mile away after all the crazy supernatural shit that's happened to me. And sure enough, when the rest of the gang gets home, Can-Do uses similar lotus flower-like tricks on them, like Isaiah getting a full scholarship to UW even with his severe arm injury. Even if he flat out says that he's not sure he wants to play football anymore, he still gets the scholarship. Yeah, that sounds legit. Steve deciding to forgive James for the clone's bad treatment of him, and even asks him to the prom, complete with him taking up his campy gay lifestyle out of nowhere, and Colin and Sarah equally out of nowhere deciding to patch things up, and Sarah even going to the trouble to fly all the way back to Port Lawrence just to tell Margot the good news in person. Oh, and just listen to Isabella's scenario.
When I walked in, my mom said, "It's so nice to see you."
What? Wait, your mom just said it was nice to see you?
Yes. She never said that to me before.
God, I feel so freaking bad for this kid, but I am grateful that my parents were crazy about me. Anyway, unlike Lucas, the rest of the gang knows when something seems too good to be true and avoid becoming living dummies, but they do still get captured by Can-Do. Okay, so I don't really feel the need to detail the rest of this too much, but basically what happens is they defeat Candy by having Brat pretend to be possessed by the soul of the Carney he duped years ago who wants to make things right with his former boss. But in the process, Isaiah gets very badly injured, with the doctors doubting his chances of surviving. But thankfully, Margot saves him with Candy's spellbook, and all's well that ends well. Or is it? What happened to the love triangles in the story? Guess what? They're never resolved. Neither is the question about whether Candy's really back or not. I know what you're probably thinking. Dude, this is only the first season. Those will just be answered in the next season. That's a fair assumption, sure, except for the fact that they've revealed that the new season is apparently going to be an anthology series with completely new characters. So yeah, it is more than a little disappointing that they leave so many loose ends untied here, especially when the rest of this episode was so freaking good. So yeah, overall, I'd say this series is not great, but it is definitely good. Sure, it leaves more things unanswered than there are books in the series overall, and some of its approaches to certain classic Goosebumps villains and scenarios was a tad questionable, let's just say. But the characters are engaging, the backstories are well executed if cliched. I think we can all agree that this is the scariest looking depiction of Slappy ever. I honestly think he'll haunt your nightmares more than just about every other depiction of Slappy put together. So all things considered, I really am looking forward to how these people tackle Stay Out of the Basement in Season 2.